Hi, this is Colleen from Keeping the Peace Defensive Handgun Training for Women, and today is episode 7 of the Preparing the New Shooter series. We're going to cover two things in today's video. We'll talk about how to load cartridges into your handgun. We'll cover semi-automatics and revolvers. And then in the second portion, we're going to be discussing how to make some simple, attainable range goals and some very simple exercises you can do as a beginner at the range. So here we go. I'm going to be using snap caps for this video because I'm not at the range. I'm actually in my classroom. And I try not to be loading live rounds in my classroom. First thing I'm going to do is pick up the handgun with my firing hand, which we talked about in the gripping video. I'm going to use the thumb of my strong hand to press the cylinder release button, which is here. And then I'm going to use the first two fingers of my support hand to just press that cylinder open from the other side. Then I'm able to transfer the gun into the support hand and control the cylinder with my thumb and second finger. The reason I do this is because I have a whole lot more dexterity and coordination with my strong hand, so I want to handle my cartridges with that hand so that I'm not fumbling and dropping them. I'm just going to slip those rounds right into those holes, and you see I'm turning the cylinder with my thumb and second finger as I go. Just makes it easier. All I need to do is use that thumb to close that cylinder, transfer it right back into my strong hand, and I'm ready to fire my revolver. After I'm finished shooting, if I decide to stop or if I just run out of rounds, I'm going to just use my thumb again to open that cylinder, and you can use your extractor rod to get the rounds out or to get the empty cartridges out. You'll find at the range when you start shooting that your cartridges, after they're fired, the casing will swell a little bit because of heat, and it'll kind of want to stick, and you'll spend all day if you try to pull them out with your fingernails. It's a lot easier just to use your extractor rod to dump those out. Now let's talk about semi-automatics. I see a lot of people come to the range as beginners and load the rounds into their magazine backwards the first time. This happens a lot, men and women both. There's, it happens all around. So I'm going to try to make it clear to you how to know which end goes in first, okay? Some people will say, well, you just load the flat side of the cartridge toward the flat side of the magazine, but that doesn't always work because there are some magazines out there that are flat on the front and on the back. What you need to get familiar with is what I call the mouth side of your magazine, okay? You see that there's an open end and then there's a closed end. I'm going to take the magazine out of my belt line and show you one with live cartridges in it so that you can see what I'm talking about, okay? So here's one with the actual cartridge in it. You can see how this is the mouth end. It's open, and then the back side is closed. The open end is what goes toward the front of your gun. Front meaning muzzle end. So the back side of your cartridge has a little primer. You see that little round piece in the middle of the back of the cartridge? That's what's going to be struck by the firing pin, so it needs to be on the back where the firing pin comes out. So I'm going to make sure that my mouth end goes toward the front and the cartridges go so that the actual bullet portion of my cartridge, which is this part, is facing the front of the gun. Magazine. I like to hold the magazine in my support hand, and I find that I'm a lot stronger in the thumb than any of the other fingers of my dominant hand, so I will press down with my thumb. I'm going to press down and then back. On the second cartridge, I'm going to use pressure from my support thumb to take a little bit of spring tension off, and then I'm going to press down and back. Once you have those rounds in your magazine, you're going to pick up your gun with your firing hand, turn your magazine so that the base plate sits in the middle of the palm of your support hand, wrap your fingers around, point your index finger right at the nose end of the cartridge. That will help you guide it right into the magazine well. As soon as that cartridge is no longer visible, you're going to get rid of that finger and just slam it in with the palm of your hand. Go straight over the top, get a C grip on the top of your slide, push forward with your firing hand, and then just let go with your support hand. Safety on if you're not going to immediately begin shooting. If you want to get the cartridges out of your magazine, let's say you stopped shooting and you don't want to shoot anymore, use your thumb on the back side of the cartridge, press forward right into the palm of your hand, and they'll come right out. In the first quadrant, I would just make myself a crosshair. And you may want to make it fairly bold. I would probably start you out at about 5 yards. You don't need to start out with long distance because you'll frustrate yourself. Okay, so I would say start out at about 5 yards. And what you want to do is level and center your sights right on this middle portion. Sometimes with a brand new shooter, I'll put a little orange dot in the middle so they have something a little bigger to look at. And what I encourage them to do is load from, I'm trying to write upside down. Is that a 3? No, that's a 3. I'm upside down. I would say load 3 rounds into each magazine. And what you're going to be focusing on here is trying to control your trigger finger. And I would not move on to another exercise until you're able to control your trigger finger. If you watched the trigger control video in this series, you remember that I talked about controlling the press and the release. So I would not move on from this exercise until I'm able to control both the press and the release. So you are actually feeling the trigger reset and you're not allowing that finger to go any further. I would do sets of 3 rounds. And let's say I shot my first 3 rounds and I had a hole here, here, and here. Okay? I would mark those 3 rounds and I would put that that was number 1. That was the first time I shot that. And I would see what my pattern was. Okay? The next time I shoot it, let's say I hit here, here, and here. Okay? I would circle those. That would be number 2. Mark yourself as you go, because that way you can watch yourself progress. Also, it'll help you to analyze yourself once you've gained control over your trigger finger. It'll help you to analyze what other things might be going on. You don't want to try to conquer every shooter error all at once. You want to kind of pick one and master it, conquer it, and then move on to another one. So the first one I would try to conquer would be controlling the trigger finger, because it's the culprit in the majority of shooter errors. After that's being done with no problem, I would draw about, I don't know, maybe double that size. Those are about the size holes that I like to use. Okay, so maybe a palm-sized circle. Okay, all of that. Still stay at 3 to 5 yards until you're really good at this, getting all of your rounds inside that circle, and then press it forward. So if you can do this extremely well, concentrating on the trigger control again, if you're getting them all inside this outer circle at 3 yards, then push it back to 5 yards. And if you can keep all of those in the circle at 5 yards, push it back to 7. If you can keep them all in this circle at 7 yards, pull it back to 3 and use the smaller circle. Okay, just kind of giving yourself goals, little bits at a time, and conquering one before you move on to something else. Okay? There's a concept in the shooting world called aim small, miss small, and that's something that I use throughout my training with myself and with other people. So, a new shooter might look at this and think, oh my, that's just impossible. But if you're controlling your trigger finger, it probably is possible. That's why I said get control of your trigger finger first, okay, before you move on to something like this. Now, if when you're doing this exercise, you get to the point where you feel like you're controlling your trigger finger, but you're still hitting all over the place, there may be a completely different problem. You may need to go back through the videos that talked about gripping properly, standing properly, aligning the sights properly, all those different things that we covered up until this point. And we're also down the road in this same series, we're going to have a target analysis video. So we'll talk more about analyzing where your shots fall in the quadrants and figuring out what on earth you might be doing. Sometimes you're doing multiple things. So we'll talk about those at a later date.